The Grovewood Inn glowed against the mountain evening, its tall windows spilling golden light across the terrace stones. I adjusted the collar of my simple navy dress, the pearl brooch catching a faint shimmer as I clutched the silver-wrapped box in my hands. 10 years of marriage was no small feat, and though the invitation had never arrived, I convinced myself that showing up to celebrate Andrew and Caroline was an act of goodwill, a chance to mend the silence that had grown in our family like ivy. Inside, the air was rich with roasted lamb and polished wood, the string quartet weaving their music through the laughter of Asheville's well-dressed elite. I rehearsed the smile I planned to give my son when he turned and saw me there, a small gesture to bridge the distance. At the hostess stand, I gave my name. Eleanor Whitford. I'm here for the Whitford anniversary. The young woman scrolled through her tablet, frowning. I don't see your name on the list, ma'am. I offered her a gentle smile, shifting the box from one hand to the other. There must be a mistake. I'm Andrew's mother. Before she could reply, Andrew stepped from the dining room. His charcoal jacket fit perfectly, his expression sharp. He froze when he saw me, then quickly masked his face with something colder. Mom, he said under his breath, his voice low but edged. You weren't invited. His eyes flicked toward Carolyn, who was watching from across the room with a circle of friends. He stepped closer, his tone clipped. Please leave before this gets awkward. A staff member shifted nearby. Guests were beginning to turn. My grip tightened on the gift, but I said nothing. I turned toward the door. The cool night air rushed my face as I crossed the terrace back to the car. Each measured step burned, carrying me into memories of everything I had given up for him. Driving home, the dark road wound along the French Broad River, but my mind wandered back to the years of sacrifice. After Richard died of a sudden heart attack, the world had narrowed. Andrew was only 12, his grief raw and unshaped, and I promised him that his father's absence would not steal his chances. So I worked nights at the hospital cafeteria, ladling soup until my back ached, then woke at dawn to scrub cabins for tourists in the Blue Ridge. My hands cracked, my body bent, but I kept moving because Andrew needed more than grief. He needed a future. When he brought home his acceptance letter from Chapel Hill, I cried in the kitchen, clutching that envelope like a lifeline. He never knew that I had sold my wedding band to cover the deposit on his dorm. I drove him to campus in a borrowed truck filled with second-hand furniture, smiling as though the sacrifice were nothing. Later, when he wanted a condo in Charlotte, I refinanced our small house in Biltmore Village, the one Richard and I had built together, telling myself it was an investment in Andrew's independence. While friends traveled and retired, I clipped coupons and scrubbed floors, convinced each sacrifice was a seed planted in my son's future. The day he crossed the graduation stage, I stood with my heart swelling, believing every hour of exhaustion had finally bloomed into return. That's why the look on his face at the Grovewood cut deeper than any words. He didn't see sacrifice or devotion. He saw an inconvenience. It hadn't always been that way. In the early years after college, Andrew would call on Sundays, stop by for preserves from my pantry, tease me about still folding his shirts. But once Caroline entered his life, warmth shifted. She was polished and sharp, her beauty the kind that belonged to glossy magazines. I tried to welcome her, taking her to farmers' markets, offering recipes, sharing pieces of my world. She smiled politely and later told Andrew my life felt small. At holiday dinners, she placed me at the end of the table, speaking of vacations and investments, while glancing at me with a sweetness that barely covered the sting. Slowly, Andrew's words began to echo hers. He corrected my manners, reminded me about appearances, and my place at their gatherings became less welcome. That night at the Grovewood wasn't simply an anniversary. It was Caroline's stage, a carefully curated image of perfection. I had become the imperfection she refused to allow on display, and Andrew had chosen her stage over his mother. When I pulled into my driveway, the gift still rested unopened on the seat beside me. I carried it inside, placed it gently on the kitchen table, and poured a glass of Merlot to steady my breath. Inside that box was an album I had assembled for weeks, snapshots of fishing trips, scraped knees, birthdays with Richard's laugh in the background. I thought it would remind Andrew of where he came from, of who had carried him through the storms. Instead, it sat unopened, heavy with rejection. I pulled Richard's old safe box from the closet and spread the estate papers across the table. Nearly $2 million in bonds and property, everything I had preserved for Andrew. For years, I told myself it would all pass to him. But tonight, staring at the numbers and remembering his voice at the end, I felt the first fissure of resolve. I picked up a pen, began drafting changes, then stopped. Some stubborn corner of my heart hesitated. Perhaps I thought if he came tomorrow, if he looked me in the eye, maybe there was still a bridge. I left the papers scattered, turned off the light, and walked down the hall. The night pressed heavy, but inside me, a new clarity stirred. The morning light crept in soft and indifferent. But I lingered in bed, the Grovewood humiliation still pulsing in fragments. Andrew's sharp voice, Caroline's flawless smile concealing knives, the polite stares of strangers pretending not to watch. My tears had dried sometime in the night, leaving behind something quieter, steadier. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen lit up with a flood of missed calls and messages. 36 calls, 17 voicemails, dozens of texts. For a moment, I only stared, unmoved. Then I pressed play on the first voicemail. Andrew's voice spilled out taut with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing? The venue says the payment bounced. Fix this now." The second was harsher, his words slurred with leftover champagne. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. Do you know how this makes us look?" By midnight, the tone had shifted. "Mom, please, we need you. Don't let this ruin everything." Caroline's texts came in waves, first cutting, then desperate. "You humiliated us. This is your fault. Make this right." Minutes later, "We can fix this, but you need to act now." Then softer, "We'll talk tomorrow. Just please transfer the money." I set the phone face down on the counter and brewed coffee. The kitchen filled with its rich aroma, grounding me. Their panic spilled through every message, but none of it touched the calm that had begun to settle inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to fix anything. I sipped slowly, listening only to the steady tick of the clock. The pounding on the front door came that evening. Sharp, insistent rattling the glass panes. I tightened my robe, already knowing who it must be. When I opened it, Andrew stood in the porch light. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes rimmed red. He looked nothing like the polished man from the night before. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please. You've got to fix this." "The house, the mortgage company's calling. My job's hanging by a thread. I can't keep it together." Before I could speak, Caroline pushed past him, her heels clicking furiously on the wood floor. Her perfume filled the hall, sharp and cloying. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You owe us. After everything we've built, after the family name we've carried, you can't just abandon us now. We are family, Eleanor." I looked at her steady. Her words didn't sting anymore. They rang hollow, brittle. I turned my eyes to Andrew, but his shoulders slumped as though all pretense had drained from him. He whispered, almost to himself, "She's been paying for everything. The mortgage, the dinners, half our life. It wasn't me. It was her." Caroline froze, her mouth open. "What are you talking about?" He didn't look at her. 3 years she's been carrying us, and I let you think it was me. I let everyone think it was me. Her composure cracked. "You mean all this time we've been living on her money?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The perfect image they had built dissolved in a heartbeat revealing only fear. I stood there unflinching while the world they had constructed trembled around them. "It wasn't a mistake," I said quietly, my voice steady. "It was a choice." Caroline's eyes widened. Andrew's face crumpled. They had expected me to bend to yield as I always had. But I did not. That night, I slept without fear. The next morning, the sun rose across the Blue Ridge, spilling through my windows. I gathered the estate documents into my bag and drove into Asheville. The courthouse bell struck 9 as I climbed the narrow stairs to Martin Hale's office. He had managed Richard's estate since the beginning, his hair now more silver than black. He looked at me with quiet understanding, as though he already knew why I had come. I laid the papers on his desk. "I want to change the will," I said simply. "Not a cent goes to Andrew. Not anymore." His brows lifted slightly, but he nodded. "And instead, a foundation," I said. "Scholarships for single mothers at UNC Asheville. Women who need a hand to keep their children's dreams alive." My voice steadied as I spoke. The decision felt less like punishment and more like release. Martin smiled faintly and began revising the forms. When he slid the final page across to me, he said, "A legacy of dignity." I signed my name with deliberate care, each stroke final, unshakable. When I stepped back into the street, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the cold stone. I breathed deeply, the weight on my shoulders lifting as though I had been waiting for this moment all along. That evening, I sat on the porch as the first autumn chill drifted in. The unopened gift still lay on the table, wrapped and waiting. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't need to. The photographs inside belonged to me, not to them. They were mine to remember, mine to keep. For the first time in years, I felt free not from responsibility, but from the burden of unearned loyalty. The days that followed unfolded quietly, though the silence was never empty. Word traveled quickly in Asheville. Whispers carried through neighborhood cafes and church pews, stories twisting and reshaping as they passed from one mouth to another. People said the Ellisons had put their house in Biltmore Forest, on the market the Grand Colonial, with its manicured hedges now reduced to a for sale sign staked into the lawn. Some whispered about debt, others about scandal. No one mentioned me directly, but I knew the truth would always find its way through polite society. It always did. At home, the quiet felt different now. Not heavy with regret, but light, almost tender. I rose earlier, savoring the stillness before the phone began to ring. I tended my garden, the soil cool against my palms, planting dogwoods along the back fence, where Richard once dreamed of building a swing for Andrew. My neighbor Sylvia often joined me, her laughter softening the edges of the silence. We spoke of recipes books and memories, and I felt something I hadn't in years: companionship without demand. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the legal binder still open beside me. The ink of my signature looked stark and final on the revised will. At first, I thought I would feel guilt, the old tug of maternal duty, insisting I had gone too far. But when I lifted my gaze to the framed photo above the mantel, Richard, with his arm around Andrew, on a fishing trip, I felt only peace. Richard had always said legacy wasn't measured in what you leave behind, but in how you shape the lives of others. By redirecting the estate to women who fought the same battles I had, I was honoring him, not betraying him. The messages from Andrew dwindled after a week. At first, they had been frantic, demanding, desperate. Then they turned to silence. Caroline, ever the proud one, sent only a single message: "You'll regret this." I never replied. Instead, I poured my energy into the scholarship foundation. Martin connected me with administrators at UNC Asheville, and together we drafted the framework for the Harrington Fund for single mothers. It would provide tuition, childcare stipends, and small housing grants, things I had once prayed for during those years of double shifts and aching bones. The more I spoke with the staff, the more I realized how many women stood exactly where I had once stood, weary, determined, balancing the weight of survival and hope. It wasn't vengeance that steadied me. It was clarity. Andrew and Caroline's downfall wasn't mine to orchestrate. Life was already unraveling the illusions they had built. Their debts surfaced, their credit drained, their reputation cracked. I heard from a friend that Caroline had been seen leaving a luncheon early, her smile brittle as whispers chased her down the hall. The woman who had once spoken of me as small and unworthy now found herself diminished by the very circles she had tried to impress. One evening, as the last light faded from the mountains, I found myself on the porch with the album I had intended as Andrew's gift. The silver wrapping was creased from my hands, but I opened it at last. Photographs spilled out birthdays in the backyard. Andrew's scraped knees after his first bike ride, Richard holding him high on his shoulders at the county fair. Each image pulled me back into moments of tenderness, of laughter, of a boy who had once pressed daisies into my palm with childish devotion. For a moment, grief clawed at me. I missed that boy fiercely, even as I acknowledged the man he had become. But grief gave way to resolve. Those memories were mine to cherish. They belonged to me and Richard, not to Caroline's judgments or Andrew's rejection. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, I settled into a new rhythm. The foundation launched its first scholarship cycle, and letters began to arrive from young mothers, thanking me, their words filled with gratitude and hope. Each one felt like a balm against the wounds left by Andrew's betrayal. I taped them to the fridge, where once I had posted his report cards, a new kind of pride swelling in my chest. It was on an ordinary afternoon, while trimming roses in the yard, that Andrew appeared again. His figure stood at the gate, thinner now, his eyes shadowed. He didn't come inside. He only lingered, his voice low. "Mom." I didn't know it would come to this. I set down my shears steady. "We make our choices, Andrew. Then we live with them." He swallowed, looking down at his hands. "Caroline's gone. She left last month. Took what little she could and walked away." His words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. I waited, but he said no more. Slowly, he turned and walked back down the street, his shoulders bent beneath a weight I could no longer carry for him. I didn't cry. I didn't chase after him. I simply returned to my roses, pruning away the withered branches, so new blooms could grow. That night, I dreamed of Richard again. He stood by the river, his hand warm in mine, and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. I woke with the certainty that I had finally stepped into the life we had both wanted, one built on love, not performance, on truth, not illusion. Winter came quietly that year, the Blue Ridge peaks dusted with snow, the streets of Asheville strung with lights that glowed against the long nights. I decorated the house simply just as I had always done, pine boughs over the mantel, a wreath on the door, a single candle in the window. It was enough. For the first time in years, I didn't host a large gathering, didn't fuss over elaborate meals to impress anyone. I invited Sylvia and her husband for supper, and we laughed around the table with a warmth that felt more genuine than any gala or banquet ever had. When they left, I stood in the doorway for a long while, watching their taillights fade, grateful for the quiet that now wrapped my home. The foundation was thriving. Applications poured in faster than the committee had expected. I met women who reminded me of myself years ago, tired but determined, pushing through endless days with the weight of children in their arms and futures balanced precariously on their backs. One young mother, Amelia, came to see me in person. She was barely 20, with a toddler clinging to her leg, her voice trembling as she thanked me for making it possible for her to return to school. "You don't know what this means," she whispered. But I did know. Every word she spoke reached back through time and touched the woman I had been, the one who had cried in silence while folding laundry at midnight. Helping her felt like helping myself, like redeeming all those nights of sacrifice. Andrew stayed distant after his brief visit. Occasionally, I heard from acquaintances that he had taken on odd jobs, that he was renting a small apartment in a less polished part of town. Caroline, it was said, had remarried quickly, attaching herself to another man with deep pockets and shallow roots. I didn't ask for details. Their lives were no longer mine to measure. Yet sometimes, late at night, I caught myself wondering if Andrew kept the photographs from his childhood, or if they had been discarded like old furniture when Caroline walked away. Those thoughts lingered, but I didn't let them consume me. One Sunday afternoon, I drove to the cemetery with a small bouquet of winter roses. The ground was hard with frost as I knelt at Richard's grave. I brushed the leaves away and laid the flowers down. "We did it," I murmured. "He won't waste what we built. And the women who need it most will have a chance." My voice caught, but I pressed on. "I miss him, Richard. I miss the boy we raised, but I couldn't follow him into the shadows he chose." The silence around me felt like understanding, like forgiveness carried on the winter wind. I left lighter, the ache in my chest, tempered by something close to peace. In January, the foundation awarded its first round of scholarships. The ceremony was small, held at the university library, but it felt monumental. Each recipient stood at the podium, some shy, some brimming with nervous laughter, and spoke about their hopes becoming a nurse, a teacher, a business owner. Their dreams filled the room, and as I listened, I realized that legacy wasn't what you handed down in money or houses. It was the future you ignited in others. My name would not be remembered in headlines, but in classrooms, in lives quietly changed in children who would one day say, "My mom did it because someone believed in her." That night, I sat by the fire with the album still resting on the table beside me. I opened it once more, letting the photos spill into my lap. They no longer hurt the way they once had. They told the story of a woman who gave all she had, of a family built on love, of a boy who was cherished even when he forgot it. The pain was still there, yes, but it no longer defined the story. What defined it was endurance, sacrifice, and the strength to choose differently when the time came. Spring arrived, painting the hillsides with dogwoods and redbuds. My garden flourished, and with it, so did I. Neighbors came more often, and my home was filled with laughter that wasn't bound by duty or appearances. Life had settled into a new rhythm, simpler, quieter, but infinitely more real. I no longer felt like the woman standing on the edge of a ballroom, unseen and unwanted. I was present, whole, and rooted in my own worth. One evening, as I watered the garden, Andrew appeared again at the gate. He looked weary, older, but different this time. He didn't step inside, only stood with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm trying. I've been clean 3 months. I'm working steady now." His eyes lifted to mine, filled with something raw and unguarded. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry." I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence linger, let the weight of his words settle. Finally, I nodded. I hope that's true, Andrew. For your sake. He swallowed, nodded once, and walked away. I didn't call after him. I didn't run. But for the first time, I allowed myself a small flicker of hope, not for what had been, but for what might someday be. I turned back to my garden, the dogwoods blooming behind me, a reminder that even after the coldest winters, new life always found its way through. Summer unfolded gently, sunlight stretching long across the Blue Ridge valleys. Warm breezes carrying the scent of honeysuckle through my open windows. Life had found a rhythm again. I tended my roses each morning, met with the scholarship committee in the afternoons, and in the evenings, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the fireflies blink to life in the darkening garden. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt mine. The town spoke less and less about Andrew and Caroline as the months passed. Their downfall had become old gossip replaced by fresher scandals. Sometimes people asked me in hushed tones if I ever regretted cutting him out, if a mother could ever truly let go of her son. I never gave them the satisfaction of an answer. Some choices live too deep in the soul to be explained to strangers. I carried both the ache of loss and the steadiness of resolve, and that was enough. The foundation grew faster than any of us expected. Donations poured in from places I hadn't imagined, from women I had worked alongside at the hospital years ago, from neighbors who said they admired my courage, even from strangers who had only read a small blurb in the newspaper about a mother who had redirected her estate to those in need. I often thought of Richard, how he would have smiled at the idea of his hard work rippling outward into the lives of people he'd never met. Each grant we gave felt like a stone tossed into a pond, sending circles of change wider and wider. One of the recipients Amelia stopped by again one afternoon. She was radiant, holding her little boy's hand. "I passed my exams," she said breathlessly, "and I've been offered a nursing position starting next month." Her son beamed up at me, showing off a missing front tooth. I hugged her tightly, tears stinging my eyes. Watching her walk back down the path, her boy skipping beside her, I realized that the future was already blooming. I had given up a legacy built on appearances, and instead planted one rooted in resilience. And yet, in the quiet of my evenings, Andrew lingered in my thoughts. He hadn't returned since the spring night he stood at the gate with his halting apology. But every so often, I found myself glancing at the road, wondering if he might appear again. I didn't chase that hope, but I didn't smother it either. I let it exist, small and fragile, like a seed waiting for rain. Forgiveness, I knew, was not something I owed him, but perhaps someday, if he kept walking the path he claimed, I might choose to offer it. Until then, the distance was necessary both for him and for me. As autumn neared again, I found myself reflecting more often on the twists of the past year. I thought of the Grovewood Inn, the night I had stood at the threshold, unwanted, holding a gift no one would open. That humiliation had burned so hot it could have consumed me. But instead, it lit a fire I didn't know still lived inside me. Out of that fire had come decisions that reshaped everything, not only for me, but for countless women who would now have the chance to rise. Betrayal had been the breaking point, yes, but it had also been the beginning. The last page of the photo album still waited for me. One evening, I finally slid it open. There was a picture of Andrew at age 12, his arm wrapped around Richard's shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera with sunburned cheeks after a day on the river. I traced their faces with my fingertip and closed the book gently. That memory was mine to keep. Nothing, not betrayal, not distance, not silence, could take it away. I understood then that life is not about clinging to what breaks us, but about choosing what to carry forward. I carried love. I carried sacrifice. I carried the knowledge that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks in quiet choices made behind closed doors and signatures that redirect futures in silences that say more than words ever could. If there is one truth I leave behind, it is this: you are not defined by who rejects you, but by how you rise after they do. Dignity is not given. It is chosen. And once you choose it, no one can take it from you. So, to anyone listening, anyone who has been dismissed, underestimated, or made to feel invisible, remember this: your worth does not shrink because others fail to see it. Your voice does not weaken because others try to silence it. And your future is never bound by the hands that turned you away. You hold the pen. You write the ending. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to support more stories like this.